Okay.
together with me.
I know, we might be here till tomorrow. Okay, today is Saturday, May 28th, 2005, and we are in Memphis, Tennessee to celebrate Ganny, who is Dorothy Falvey, her 85th birthday. Which, Ganny, I guess we can just start with you since we're celebrating your birthday.
Okay.
Tell us when and where you were born.
June 3rd, I was born in Dallas.
Date, year,
1920.
1920, so you will be turning 85.
Right.
Okay, and you were born in Dallas. And what siblings do you have? Or did you have?
I had a sister and a brother.
And their names?
Sister was Anita.
Uh-huh.
Brother was Francis.
Are they older or younger?
Older.
Older? Okay. How much older?
Sister was 4 years older and my brother was 11 years older.
Okay. And why were you born in Dallas? What brought your parents to Dallas?
Gosh, I don't really know.
Railroad?
Yes, my dad worked on the railroad.
He worked on the railroad? Okay. And where is your dad from?
Missouri.
Missouri. And your mom?
From Wolf City, Texas.
Wolf City. And what? Okay. Where is that?
It's north of Dallas a little way.
Never even heard of it. Okay. How old were you in 1929 when the stock market crashed?
9.
You were 9. So did you notice as a 9-year-old, did that have any effects on your life or the way your family lived?
We never had any money, but we thought nobody else did either.
So now it just made everybody even. Okay. So you didn't feel any big effects from the
No.
depression.
I saw people standing in soup lines, and we heard they were eating dogs.
Mm-hmm.
So many people were unemployed. It was just awful.
Did your dad lose his job?
No.
No? Did you ever eat a dog?
No.
Okay.
Yeah, might have, not known.
Might have.
And then where did you go to school in Dallas? Where did you graduate from high school?
Park High School.
And did you go there for 4 years or
Just 3.
3 years?
Went to Oak Cliff High School 1 year.
Okay.
Another 3 in Highland Park.
Highland Park. And were you in the first graduating Highland Park class?
Mm-hmm.
That's what I thought. So what year was that?
1937.
1937.
Wow.
Okay. And then after that, you went to SMU? And is that where you met Papa? How did y'all meet?
Well, through a mutual friend, I guess.
Where? Were you set up on a date, or did you meet him at a party?
No, he
or?
went with a friend of mine, and I dated a friend of his.
Oh, okay.
Both Pikes.
Okay. And you were
Captain.
and then was it love at first sight? Did y'all stay together after that, or?
No, we weren't going to get married as soon as we did, but his father's health failed, and he left, and his mother was left in a big house by herself, so we came to Longview to stay 2 weeks, stayed 62 years.
Well, not a huge difference.
2 weeks, 62 years.
And how old were you when you married?
19.
19. Where did you marry?
In Tyler, Texas.
In Tyler? Why Tyler?
That's where my brother lived. We were buried in his house.
Oh, at his house? And what type of ceremony did you have? Just,
What time?
I mean, it was just at his house, or was it a preacher or Methodist? Okay.
Who was the best man?
Yeah.
We didn't have one.
Oh.
What about maid of honor?
Didn't have one.
Did you go on a honeymoon?
Mexico City.
Oh, you did? Okay. I don't think I knew that. Just like Mom and Dad did.
I got sick as a dog.
You did?
Thought I was going to die.
How did you get there? Fly?
Yeah,
No.
Went on the train.
Train. Yeah. Okay.
So can you just board a train in Tyler, Texas, and end up in Mexico City, or how did you?
I don't remember that.
Hmm.
I doubt it. Probably went to Nuevo Laredo or somewhere.
Yeah, probably so.
Took the Aztec Eagle.
So what year did you get married?
1940.
Okay, and how aware were you in 1940 of impending war in Europe? Or were you aware of it at all?
I knew that the Germans had invaded Poland. And I was coming down the stairs on Sunday in Pearl Harbor Strike.
And how did you hear about that? On the radio or?
On the radio.
Mm-hmm. And what were your feelings then?
Well, I was scared, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But that's bad news.
Did you immediately think of people you knew that might be going to war?
Yeah.
Did you know a lot of people that went?
Mm-hmm.
And did you know a lot of people that didn't come back? Or did most people that you knew come
No, I didn't know of any.
So everybody you knew that went came back?
Probably.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How did World War II impact or change your life or lifestyle? Did you
they
feel any
stopped
changes?
making cars.
Stopped making cars. Did you have a car?
We had a car, 1941,
And where were you living at this time? In Longview?
Longview.
With your in-laws or?
We had moved out, I think, in June or July.
You'd moved out
Yeah.
of the house, on what street was that on in Longview?
But
That big house?
Green and Cotton on the corner.
So then did you move to the house on Knoll Drive?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Did y'all build that house on Knoll Drive? No?
Sorry,
So you were living on Knoll Drive when World War II broke out? No?
no, I wasn't.
Oh, okay. You were with the in-laws. And then how old were you? Let's see. When was Mom born?
44,
44, and Bill was born
47.
in 47. But was that the no cars? What else changed during World War II?
Well, we had ration stamps. We had to have so many stamps to get shoes, and so many stamps to get coffee, and so many stamps to get sugar.
I'm not sure why it does that.
And I had a friend who was an avid coffee drinker. She just kept the pot on all the time. So I'd trade her my coffee stamps for her sugar stamps.
Oh, really?
Then I had some shoes. Some white shoes that were buff. They were rough, you know. And I polished them so much, got to looking like they were patent. They were black leather.
And you bought those with the stamps?
Uh-huh.
Oh, how funny.
Yeah, and how about booze during that time?
Yeah, what about liquor?
You had
Of course,
to-
you ladies never drank, did
We
you?
didn't drink much.
I don't believe that at all.
Well, not at first. During the war.
Tell how.
You had to get rum. You had to buy a bottle of rum if you bought a bottle of scotch or bourbon.
Why?
I don't know.
Is there a surplus of rum or something?
Rum and Coca-Cola we drank.
And then why? I know that as long as I've known you, which is 34 years, you've been a beer drinker.
I don't
Which
care
is a
for it
little-
anymore.
Well, but most of your adult life, you liked beer.
I like beer.
You used to drink Schlitz, I know.
Yeah.
Why? How did you start drinking beer?
When Pat was born, I was nursing her, and I didn't have much milk. So my doctor advised me to drink a beer every afternoon. So I couldn't stand it at first. And I had to get an acquired taste for it. And I did.
And so you began your lifelong affair with
Yeah,
beer.
so I blamed my doctor for that.
Yeah, Pat too.
So typical.
I nursed her 6 months.
Oh, okay. Okay, so back to the war, and you had rations for, what did you do for, social, what did you do socially during that time?
Well, it was the same. We'd go to parties and dances at the country club.
Mm-hmm. Did you go out a lot?
Seemed like we did.
Every night.
Every night.
Not quite every night.
Every night.
Not quite every night.
And who stayed with the kids when you guys would go out?
Elvira,
Levira. Okay.
who had the mentality that they did. She was on their level. She played with them.
Mm-hmm. Okay. How did you meet Auntie
At a party, at a dance.
in Longview?
She was a bride.
Oh, so was it a party for her?
No.
Oh.
Just a JC thing, I think.
And how did you know that you all were going to be friends? Or
I don't know how we knew that. We just sort of clicked right at first.
Annie?
You want me to say something?
Sure.
Well, we were at a JC banquet. Mac and I married on the first day of January. This was the 19th of January.
Okay.
So saw Judge and Dorothy and several couples, and I said to Mike later, I'd give anything to know them better. I really did like them, and she's the prettiest thing. I'd like to know her better. So it wasn't too long, she rode her bicycle and came to see me. And so we've been friends ever since.
And you were living
In Longview.
right, and not far from the Noel Drive house.
Well, we hadn't bought a home at that time. We were living in an apartment down at 434 South Center. So you rode quite a ways from Noel Drive, South Center, to come see me. She found a piece of burnt toast in my trash pan and said, oh, well, she's a bride.
Well, Ganny, what are some of your fondest memories with Annie?
Oh, the trips we made together.
And where did you go?
When Pat and Jed moved to the East Coast, we went to see them. They moved to the West Coast, we went to see them.
And when they moved to the East Coast, that was your probably inaugural trip to see your favorite grandchild?
That was when she was born.
Right.
They were-
Just kidding. Okay, so the East Coast, the West Coast, where else did y'all go?
Well, we went to different places in Texas, these JC conventions. We always went to those.
And tell about the setup in the car. Who did the driving?
Mac and I did the driving. They sat in the back seat and told us how.
We drank in the back seat.
Yeah, and what were you drinking in the back seat?
Beer.
And what would you do with your empty beer cans when you were done with them?
Huh?
What did you do with the empty beer cans when you were done with
On
them?
the floor of the car.
Or
Then when we'd stop,
didn't
they'd
they go
roll
up
out.
and they'd roll out?
We went to Kilgore one time. It was Sunday afternoon. We pulled up in front of the hotel, opened the door, and all the beer cans.
And the old gents were sitting out there, you know, and out rolled the beer. We had heavy beer bottles. Out rolled the beer.
And that was from Longview to Kilgore?
Lufkin.
Oh, Lufkin. Okay.
This was a big deal. We went to Lufkin.
One a minute.
Yeah. And Lufkin was a JC convention?
Yeah.
Okay. And then you drove, I guess you obviously drove to the West Coast and to the East Coast too? Okay. Sounds good.
You came back with me on the plane
Oh, that's right.
from the West Coast.
I think that was my first time on an airplane.
You were not 3 years old, and you said you remembered it.
I do remember that. Because I think that was my first airplane trip. So that was a big deal. What is it about Longview that kept you in there 62 years instead of 2 weeks?
Well, my husband set up a law practice after so long a time. The weeks went by, and then the months, and then the years. He set up a law practice. I was his secretary.
Well, you were the loan shark first, weren't you?
Did you work for a
I was
loan shark?
shark when I was before we married.
Okay. Well, Annie, let's kind of now y'all, and don't feel like we're done with you. I mean, y'all just jump in whenever you want to. If you have something to add, right. So if you have something to add when Annie's talking, go ahead and jump right in. Annie, otherwise known as Ruth Jackson. When and where were you born?
April 2nd, 1915, in Natural Dam, Arkansas.
Natural Dam. Okay. And how do you have, how many siblings did you have?
3 brothers.
3 brothers. And are they older? Or?
2 older and 1 younger.
Okay. And what brought your parents to, I'm sorry, to Natural Dam?
What, huh?
What brought your parents to Natural Dam?
They had been born there.
Okay.
My grandparents were there. They gave Dad a farm, and he was out of school in teaching school, and they stayed there 9 years.
And your dad taught school?
Well, he got tired, and so we moved over into eastern Oklahoma, which wasn't a white settlement at all in 1915. Mm-hmm. It was mostly Indians, but Dad opened up a mercantile store. I was a year old when they went over there and opened up and had good business. It was all Indians, and Daddy always carried a little gun in his pocket because the Indians got drunk. They were mean, and they'd come knock on the door at 11 o'clock wanting something. Well, he would go with them, but they never did harm him. It was happy relations.
Mm-hmm. So he owned a mercantile store. And how old were you in 1929 when the stock market crashed?
14. I was born in 1915, so it's 14.
So you remember it probably a little bit better than Danny.
I remember it. I don't remember much about it until 1930. But Dad had 2 stores, 1 grocery, 1 hardware, and gift shop. And on December the 31st, 1930, he came home and said, we have, I don't know where they got $1,000. I said, Mama must have put $5 at a time back. But he said, we have $1,000, and I don't know where we're going to find any employment because everything was shut down. The banks had all closed, no FDIC. Whatever you had in the bank, you lost it. Stock market was nothing. Everything was flat. And in January of 1931, Daddy read in the paper about a boom in Kilgore, Texas. And they came. He came with my oldest brother and cousin.
Oil boom.
The oil boom. Because, I'll say the first well was in October of 1930. The second well was in December of 1930. So Kilgore was wild. Mm-hmm. So they came, and my oldest brother said to Dad, Dad, you got good credit, Oklahoma City Hardware. He said, why don't you let Frank and I open up Tent City, get double cots, because the men were sleeping. If they could find a cardboard box, they were sleeping on it. But if not, they slept in their clothes, maybe a week, maybe 2 weeks. So they opened up this cot house, and a man could stay there for 8 hours, and then the alarm went off, and he had to get up because a line was waiting for a bed clear out into the street. And it was already raining, cold, and muddy. But then in May of that year, well, Mama and my brother, just 2 years my senior, my younger brother, Daddy came after us, and we came to Kilgore in May, after school was out, of 1931. So we lived there all during the boom.
Mm-hmm. And where did you live? I mean, did they have a?
We lived in a little 1-room cabin, the 4 of us. And then we got 2 rooms. Boy, we were uptown. And then Daddy decided to go back in the grocery business. And he built a grocery store. But everybody that built anything built living quarters. And that's what he did. So we lived in the store.
Mm-hmm.
They'd add on once in a while, but we lived right in the store. And Daddy kept that store until the late 40s, I guess.
So you graduated from high school in Kilgore?
I'll tell you how I got my diploma. Mr. E.C. Elder was living across the road from us. The elders were a bunch of them, millions of dollars, struck it rich. But he was the superintendent of the little school in Kilgore. Well, Ralph and I needed to go to school. I just like half a year. I'd caught Ralph, and we just like one semester. So Mr. Elder said, I can't take you all to the schoolhouse because you would have everybody sitting on the floor and sitting in each other's laps. You can imagine from 800 people to 20,000 overnight. So he said, you don't have to do that. Your daddy is a teacher. And between me and your dad, you can get your certificates, which we did.
So you were basically homeschooled then?
Yeah, I was homeschooled that last, with Mr. Elder coming by nearly every day and Daddy pointing his finger. But we finished our education that way.
And so you married, I know you married at a young age.
I married my first husband, I was 17.
And how did you meet him?
He was manager of a little creamery in Longview, Jersey Gold. And he had trucks in Gladewater, Kilgore, Longview. And so one day he came on a truck, and Daddy bought milk, butter, everything from him. So once in a while he would come back. And so one day he asked me for a date. Didn't have to ask me once. I gave him a date. So that was in the winter of 31, and we married in October of 32.
Okay. And you married in Kilgore?
Married in Kilgore at the Presbyterian Church.
And what was his name?
His name was G.T. Cutler. We called him Red because he had real white skin, and he'd turn real red in the sun, so he just got the nickname of Red. But he was a cute guy.
What color
He
hair?
He died at age 30.
At age 30.
Mhm.
So you were married. Well, how old was he when you got married?
What, huh?
How old was he when you got married?
He was 22.
So you were 17
Mhm.
and he was 22.
Mhm.
So you were married 9 years?
Married
8
from
years?
1932 till 1940.
40.
Mhm.
Okay. And how did he die?
Pneumonia.
Oh, okay. And so that was 1940. So 1940 you were widowed.
Yeah.
And-
Went back to Kilgore and lived with my mother and daddy.
Where had you been living?
We'd been living in Longview.
Oh, okay. So,
Always lived in Longview till he died
okay.
because his work was there.
So then he died and you went back to Kilgore
Yeah.
just in time for the war to start.
Yeah.
So where were you?
Wait, can I ask a question real quick?
Pearl Harbor.
Well, I have a quick question. He was an otherwise healthy man.
What, huh?
He was an otherwise healthy man,
Yeah. Mhm.
and so he just was
30
struck
years
with.
old and healthy and everything, but pneumonia, the ninth day he died. Pneumonia.
Was that a common thing to have to?
No, it wasn't. And that was the first sulfur drug that hit the market. It was called sulfothiazine. And they didn't have any in Longview. But his doctor was Dr. Van Sickle, you know. And he said, we got to get sulfothiazine to Longview in a hurry. So Mr. Avery, the druggist, called Dallas, said, put it on the bus and get it to Longview. And it came in that afternoon. We just thought sometime the drug could have had something to do with it because, well, they were trying to save his life. I don't blame that. but the drug was new, and we used to think maybe he didn't react to it like people did later. But anyway, they gave him 3 or 4 doses of lysine, but he died. I don't think anything could have saved him. But they tried. But he died.
A lot of people died after taking sulfa drugs.
Really?
What?
Said a lot of people died after taking sulfa drugs.
Yeah. It was a tricky, but everybody tried it.
So then you moved back to Kilgore.
Yeah.
And being a widow and just having lost your husband, were you aware of goings on in Europe and impending war?
You're what, huh?
Were you aware of the goings on in Europe and impending war over there in 1940?
Of course, it was fine, moving back with Mother and Daddy. My husband left me a wonderful insurance policy that at his death. And so I moved back and lived with Mother and Daddy and bought a car, added on to the house. We had happy relations, but then I knew Mac in Longview. So then he was divorced and I was a widow, and so we got together.
Okay. What are your memories of Pearl Harbor?
Every one of us were at Mother and Daddy's in the living room listening to the radio, and President Roosevelt was christening some ship. And we were just all glued to the radio listening to him. And then this flash came on. They cut him off everything and said that we had been attacked at Pearl Harbor by the Japanese. And then they went on. They didn't say too much about it that Sunday afternoon. But Monday morning, President Roosevelt declared war. About 8 o'clock on Monday morning.
So you had a younger brother.
I had 3 brothers to get on the bus and go to Dallas because they were all the age to go to war. But Chester had injured his foot as a boy, and it was pretty bad, so they didn't take him. And Ralph had a bad rupture that he had gotten when he was about 11 years old. They didn't think he would make a good army. But the youngest one was in perfect health, so they took him.
Where did he go?
He came back and went to the board and signed up 6 years for the Navy.
And where was he stationed?
He went to Great Lakes, was stationed there, and the next stop was South Pacific.
Okay. And then he came back and...
He got his discharge. Well, he still had 2 years after the war. But the young men were coming back and getting all the jobs. So I did my bit to try to get him out. And I did. He got home too, but he got his discharge at Norfolk, Virginia.
Okay.
Came back home.
And came back to Kilgore?
Came back to Longview.
To Longview. Okay. And at this time, when he came back and when the war was over, were you already married to Mac?
Oh, yeah.
So now
we
tell
married
more about
in
how...
42 and the war wasn't over till 45.
Okay, so you married in 42, and where is he from? Or where was he from?
Back?
Yes.
Bienville, Louisiana.
And what brought him to Longview?
He got laid off from Texas Company in Port Arthur. There were another one that overnight, everything was gone. Laid off everybody, locked the gates. So Mac thought, well, there's not anything here, and he hitchhiked to Longview. And got to Longview and got a job at that little station right down on Methven Street now. The man gave him a job. Then he saw cabs going around town. he thought, I'd like to drive one of those. So he went to work driving one. And he bought one, then he bought two, and he'd buy them out. And he bought out the sixth one he bought out, then the city gave him a franchise.
Oh, okay.
And he was in the business for himself for 42 years.
And how did you meet? You said you knew him when you were previously lived in Longview, but how did you meet?
He knew my husband. They were friends, and we knew them as a couple.
Oh, okay.
But then, after he was divorced and I was a widow, he came to Kilgore with my brother. Well, my brother Ralph was living with me.
Oh, okay.
So they came to Kilgore to eat chicken and a few other goodies. Mama cooked. So it kind of stemmed from there.
And where were you all married? Where were you and Mac married? In Longview?
No, Presbyterian Church in Kilgore.
In Kilgore. Okay. And did you go on a honeymoon?
We went to West Texas.
Oh, where?
In New Mexico. And it was in January, and we ran into ice and snow and all kinds, but it was fun. Had a good time.
Okay. And then, let's see. So, you're married for the second time and living in Longview, and it's what, 42? So then the war ends, and what are some of your fondest memories of social life and I guess social life in Longview during those days?
Being with the Falveys, the four of us. We had other friends, but the four of us were always
together. Okay. And what were some of your hobbies?
selling war bonds. They got us on every ticket sale that came to town. We'd go to different stores, Anthony's, Hurwitz, they'd set up. And they'd call the two of us. And then they called us for war bonds. And there'd be a little shack out on the street, you know, in front of the First National Bank. We'd get out there, and if we weren't selling many, we'd start, hey, war bonds over here, come buy a war bond. And that, and we had a lot of parties. A lot of young people hadn't gone to war. The JC's got down to about 7 members, but we had a lot of fun. Mm-hmm. We just had a good time.
Right.
A lot of fun.
Okay. Well, I guess I can open it up to questions from the audience. If anybody in the audience has other questions. Or is there anything else that we skip? Who is your favorite?
I want to hear about how the booze was handled over at the dinner time over at the old house with Mimi.
Oh, Mimi
and
loved
the whiskey bottle.
Mimi loved boiled custard, and she'd have it when she'd have big crowds. She'd always have boiled custard and cake for dessert. So she had a bottle of booze, or was it rum? I don't remember what it was. Probably just booze.
I thought it was a bottled bird.
Well, it might have been. Anyway, she put it on the floor by her chair, and then when the custard was served, she said, "Would anybody like a little flavor in it?" So we said yes. So she reached down and get the bottle and put a teaspoon in her little dish of custard. Well, she'd take a couple of sips and she'd say, "Does anybody want any more in it?" So she reached down and get the bottle and put it in the custard. So what she wound up with was eggnog.
Danny, why don't you tell us a little bit about Papa's family and his parents and how he grew up?
Oh, his parents. His father was a tyrant. He wanted everybody under his thumb. He was blind when we married. He had lost his eyesight about a year and a half before we married. He had a little office out on the Kilgore Highway where people that he knew would come in.
What did he do?
He was a doctor.
just general doctor.
Yeah, horse and buggy doctor. He'd have a woman having a baby out in the country, and he'd go out in his horse and buggy and stay until she delivered. If it was 3 days, he'd stay 3 days.
Oh.
And his patients loved him, of course.
So he was very different with his patients than he was at home.
2 faces. He was jealous of her, just ruined her life.
And that's the reason that you all moved to Longview, because he was blind and
he
she
had a
needed
mental
help.
breakdown.
He had a mental breakdown.
Went to Wales, Texas, where all the clan was born, and had a little camp, little cottage, log cabin, really. And the son of one of his friends took care of him. He stayed a long time. Wouldn't have anything to do with his wife.
And then how did he die?
I don't really remember what killed him, do you?
I really don't. I was in like the 9th grade, I think, wasn't I? Something like that.
He died in 62.
And he was one of several children, right?
16.
There's 16 Falveys. And where did they grow up? Gladewater?
Wales, Texas.
Oh, Wells. Okay. And then,
Papa was third. From the oldest.
4 of them were doctors.
oh,
And 2 of them were lawyers.
And there were only, like 3 girls? 3 girls.
and what about Mimi?
She was
Papa's
one of 3 girls.
And her father was a doctor too, right?
Yeah.
In Gladewater?
They built this house. That's going to get a marker, I think. They keep talking about it.
Yeah, it still exists today. I don't think it has the marker yet, but they're working on it.
It's supposed to be.
That's your grandfather's mother's house?
Yes. So my great-grandmother's house in Kilcourt on my Gladewater, sorry.
And what was her name?
Walker,
Lena Walker.
which is where Ann Walker comes from.
Oh, okay.
That's how my mom's.
Mm-hmm.
So. Well, anything else?
That's a lot of time.
The
in
dogs.
one place.
Fritzy and, say something about the dogs?
We had 2 dachshunds. One was Fritz, and he was so fat, could hardly move. But he lived to be old, about 8 years old, I think. Then we had another one, whose name was,
There was a Ricky in there somewhere.
Ricky. His name was Heinrich something.
Oh.
Called him Ricky. And he had a heart attack when I was in New Haven when you were born. He died.
And then there was one that was paralyzed in his back legs and was able to scoot around.
Yeah,
What was his name? Wasn't that Ricky?
that was Rick.
That was Ricky. Yeah, what was the other? There was another one.
Well, that last one wasn't really a dachshund. His legs kept getting longer and longer. He was the smartest dog I ever had, though he was a cur, just a Heinz 57. So,
Andy had one called Frisky.
Yeah, I had a Frisky. Bird brain. She didn't have a brain, so we just called her bird brain. But the cutest thing about Fritz was Pat and Bill would be back there in the bedroom. Dorothy and I'd be sitting in the den. He had a fat little chest. They'd put a T-shirt on him, dress him up, and then y'all would have a style show.
Put a hat on him.
And put a little hat on him. He was the sweetest dog that ever lived. They could do anything to that dog. It didn't matter. Oh, no. And when Mac, my husband, hit the door, he'd go to the refrigerator because he needs to go get something to eat. And he kind of liked beer, you know. One night we had a party, and I think little Little dog kinda got too much beer,
Mhm.
but he liked it, but oh, he was a wonderful dog.
What was a typical day like for you when you had two small children? I know that you all had your main meal at lunch, right? And you would cook that?
Judge came home at lunch. I had a cook usually. I had help when I had children little. And they would usually cook lunch and then leave about 2. Andy and I'd go to town, ride around.
Oh, well, hey, wait a minute. Let's go back to the story about how y'all took off with the pig trail in one day and you left me behind. Let's tell that story.
Yeah, let's get that
And
on
then-
record.
yeah,
What was
and then,
that?
And then about the times that I did go with you to the pig trail in.
And what is the pig trail in?
Beer joint.
Oh. And is
So we
this
had
the
With
middle
curb-
of the day?
With
beer
curb
joint?
service.
Curb service. No, this was late afternoon.
Late afternoon,
We had
4,
curb
5
service.
o'clock.
We didn't drink
Thirsty
before 5.
time.
You didn't drink before 5?
That was beer time.
5 o'clock. Okay. So
Or
you get in the
thereabout.
car and go get a beer.
Sure.
And little Billy Falvey's in the back seat. What about Patsy Bobo? Where is she?
Well, she was probably at Lou Junior's or somebody's house. I don't think she ever went with us.
Mm-mm.
Sister was socializer.
We'd go to town to sit and watch the folks. We'd take her, she had her car seat in the middle. She'd sit there and eat crackers and look at the folks just like we were.
She'd go to town with us, sit there 3 hours. And here she go, looking at the folks. Never cried, never said a word. She just loved to go.
Well, tell them about the time that y'all left me in the driveway. Y'all were heading off to the pig trail
I
in,
said,
and
I
I
want
was.
to go lift you.
I had my. What did I say? Something about my hat, didn't I?
Oh, I get, no,
I think I said, "Let me get my hat," and I go lift
I
you.
go lift
Yeah.
you, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, he'd stand there. I want to go lift you. I wouldn't leave you again, Bill. Hey, want to go lift you, Mama.
Was that when we had QT
Must
or
be.
Alberta?
Oh, I don't know.
We had one that stood on the floor furnace barefooted, and her feet had crosses on, you know, where they'd burn. She didn't get
Were her feet
Isn't that
cold?
strange?
Why don't you talk a little bit about Bill Dooley?
Bill Dooley was the stinkiest person I've ever known in my life.
Literally stinky.
He took a bath twice a year, once in the spring and once in the fall, whether he needed it or not. His overalls were so dirty and stiff with perspiration they could have stood in the corner by themselves.
And what did he do for you?
He was our yard man. He'd come in to eat lunch and we'd have to leave the kitchen. When he died, they buried him before they planned to because he smelled so bad they couldn't stand it.
He was faithful, though.
And his lockup was a treasure.
7
His
o'clock
bathroom?
of
His
morning.
It was
where
near
he
your
kept all of his-
laboratory.
where he kept all of his tools. And you open that, if you, heaven help you if you had to find something in Bill Dewey's lockup. Because it was awful.
I never did go in.
And he had a bathroom back there
Yeah.
that no one ever went in either.
Funny thing happened one time. Of course, sister always loved to talk. You know, she was born talking. So, Judge and Dee had added a big, the bill was going to be coming around. So they added on their bedroom and added another room and another bath. So their bedroom was large enough that Judge had the double bed and Dee got a single bed. So Pat goes out to visit with Bill Dooley and she says, "My mom and daddy don't sleep together anymore." We heard her out there just, just a breeze with Bill Dooley.
Oh, that's funny. Looking back, who was your favorite president?
FDR.
And why?
Those days, you really respected the office and the man. We didn't have any jokes about him, no cartoons, nothing.
Did you know that he was paralyzed?
We didn't realize it because we never saw him in a wheelchair. He was always propped up by two men or sitting down. We never did know.
Scott and I just recently watched a documentary on him, and there are only 2 known pictures of him in a wheelchair, and they weren't released until after he died.
There are 35,000 photographs of him in his presidential library today, and only 2 of them are of him in his wheelchair. And they were both taken by a family friend that never released him until after he died.
He didn't want anybody to know he was good in a wheelchair.
Well, and he probably wouldn't have been elected.
No, that's what he thought.
And what about you, Annie? Same, or did you have a different president?
Oh yeah, I loved him because he brought work to America. Government programs, it wasn't given. You worked for it. He strung electricity across the United States. He said he didn't want any family being without electricity, where before then, if you lived 5 miles out of town, you were on a coal oil lamp. So he did more for our country than anybody because he got it back on a working program. Of course, they didn't have any, nobody had any gimmick programs. But I know my 2 brothers worked there in Kilgore, and they got a job working, but he wanted to give people work, which he did. He turned, the war was bad, but he turned our country upside down because he was capable.
When was the first time you flew on an airplane?
I was 40 years old.
Where did you go?
Colorado to see him and Cam.
What was that like? Were you nervous or no?
Well, we went on a plane from Longview to Dallas. It was a little one, but I wasn't scared.
And then Dallas to Colorado. What about you, Annie?
Well, in Kilgore, this man had a little single-engine plane, and he would take you up for $1. So Mom and Dad didn't know it, but I'd go out there during every Sunday if I had $1, and I'd go up in that little plane.
Where'd you go with?
So he got to cutting up pretty good in that little plane, and I thought, well, I better not go up with him anymore because he's going to crash. Well, he did.
He did?
He eventually crashed, burned himself up. But Mom and Dad didn't know that. But I love to go out there and fly on
Who'd
Sunday.
you go with?
Hmm?
Who'd you go with?
Hmm?
Who'd you go with?
I had a girlfriend that would go with me, but she wouldn't go up. She'd wait for me. I'd go
Where'd
up
you
by
get
myself.
$1?
Huh?
Where'd you get $1?
Well, that's a good question. I probably got in Daddy's pocket. Got
Dollars
$1.
were scarce
If
back
I
in
had
those
$1,
days.
that's where I'd go on Sunday afternoon. Then I'd go to the driving range. Because kind of had a boy there kind of liked.
Well, I remember Ganny used to, as a little girl, used to drive out to the country. When she was living in Dallas, she would drive out to the country to go to Love Field to watch the planes come in. That was country.
Yeah. Before we finish, just for my personal happiness, will you please tell the story you used to tell me as a little girl about making mud pies in the chicken coop? That was my favorite story.
Well, my favorite cousin lived in Dallas. I was living in Oklahoma at the time, and we'd come to Dallas in the summer, and Mumsy would just drop us off at Aunt Kathleen. So Kathleen and I were such good friends, and so we decided we'd make a playhouse in her backyard. Well, they had chickens in the coop, and so naturally it was pretty messy, but we took our soap and water and disinfectant and whatever and cleaned it up, made a playhouse out of it, made furniture for it, and the inside we had, of course, for our kitchen and bedroom, living room, and outside where the chickens had been, that was our front yard. We'd get on in our nightgowns early in the morning. We'd get up and go out there and play like we'd slept there all night.
And you made mud pies.
Yeah, and put nuts in them, put rocks in them for nuts.
Mhm. And you moved around a lot as a little girl.
Yeah.
Because why? Because your dad worked for the railroad, or?
No, he was with the lumber company this time, and they'd open new offices, and I always send him to get them trained. But we moved to Oklahoma, to Shawnee. We lived in Holdenville. We went to Carlsbad, New Mexico for about 6 months. And I had to change schools all the time, you know.
But you were born in Dallas. Okay.
Baylor Hospital. Oh, no. Left when I was about 3 and went to Oklahoma. Stayed until I was 10 and moved back to Dallas.
And here we are today in Memphis. Well, ladies, I think we're about out of tape.
I bet we are.
So we can continue talking, but we're not going to get it on video. But that was good.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
I learned.
You were talking about getting, that first air conditioner or whatever, and experiencing air conditioning for the first time. It's so hard for, I know at least me, for us to imagine, like, life without air conditioning. I mean, I'm sure it would get 100 degrees then, like it does now.
Texas wasn't any cooler.
How could you sleep? How could you? I just can't imagine that.
We just didn't notice it, I guess.
Oh, we had those fans, attic
We had
fans.
attic fans. Of course, they pulled in hot air.
They brought in hot.
But at least it was air.
Yeah.
But in the early days of the boom, the guys would work shift, and their wives they'd work all night, sleep in the day. They were in one of those little one-room cabins, and it was 100 degrees. And they'd bring sheets out of ice water, and they had a thing built to where they'd put that sheet on it and put a fan behind it, the few that had a fan, and it would blow that cool air on their husband so they could sleep.
Mm.
The grocery stores were the first things to be air conditioned, and then the movies would just blow air on you
Oh, yeah.
first.
And so you go to the movies all day.
Well, we didn't go until 9.
Oh.
But you got used to it. I guess we did, because we'd go get on the shady side of where the sun wasn't, and thought we were cool. And
And in Kathleen's, we'd have pallets on the floor and just a fan over, to blow on it. But we could sleep. And I remember.
And driving around in the car has got to be.
Oh, my famous last words were when air conditioning, we got the house air conditioning, had a unit in every room. And so then they started air conditioning cars, and I said, well, who'd want an air-conditioned car? If you go from a cool house to a cool store, surely you can walk that distance and not be air-conditioned. But
Nope. So when you first got air conditioning, it was single units, and in each you just put in the window.
units. Then we got a big floor unit when we added the room on. But we had a unit in every other room in the window. It does seem hard to believe, doesn't it?
somebody had a fan about that big. They were rich. They had a big fan, because my mother had ones about like that. That's all. But, we were young, and I'd hate to think I'd have to do that at now at my age. I'd probably die.
Oh, it'd be terrible. I tell you.
That's all right, too. But we were just out going
We
all
didn't
the
know anything
time.
else, so
And
Right.
playing and
we didn't know it was hot.
Right.
But I remember when air conditioning first came to Longview, in the stores. I traded at this grocery store. It was an independent grocery store. And Penny's, a few of them had air conditioning, but none of the independent stores. But I asked Mr. Norton, I said, are you going to air condition? He said, oh no, Ruth, it ruined the crackers and the cookies. We're not going to put that in this store. They finally did. But,
Yeah.
and I remember when Neiman put it in Dallas, I think they were about the first one. They lost some women that worked there because they said they'd die in that old cold air. They'd get TB or they'd die, and they left.
So what would you do when you came to Dallas? What was that?
Shopping,
Shopping?
having lunch.
Would you spend the night?
No. No, Dorothy and I would go up and spend the day and come back.
Get some beer for the road back?
Oh, we'd stop in Gladewater. That was the first place you could buy beer. We'd stop in Gladewater and have some beer
On the way?
all the way home.
On the way home.
But in Dallas, we would shop and have lunch.
Go to the Century
We went to
Room.
the Adolphus quite a bit, didn't we?
They had a room called Century Room, which was real pretty, and that's where they had dances and orchestra.
Oh.
So we go there, and Baker had the mural room, which was just like it, so we'd go there some.
I've got that picture of you and Dee and I at the Adolphus. And that day, I think one of us said, we didn't know Dorothy was pregnant. She hadn't mentioned it. But she was sitting some way, and I said, well, you look like you're pregnant. I am. But she didn't show just 4 pounds more. She
You
wears,
only gained like how many pounds?
she wore a suit.
25, I think, something like that.
Oh, really? That much?
20 or 25. She weighed 9, 8.5, and the afterbirth was that weight too, so that took most of it. So I could put on the clothes that I wore if I could.
I couldn't.
How much did you gain?
35 or 40. I gained a lot with both of them. But. Oh well.
Well, so was the pigtail inn, was that kind of the hot spot? Pig trail, excuse me. Was that the hot spot, or where was the place to be in Longview?
Well, it wasn't the big trailer.
Okay.
Was it the real Palm Isle?
Yeah, that's where the dances came, the big name bands came. And old Maddie's Ballroom. Chan Chandler had an orchestra. He was there one night and started raining. The roof was tin, and it rained on us, and it sounded so good. It was raining at midnight when he was supposed to leave, so he just stayed and played for nothing
Oh, good.
till the rain stopped.
Chan Chandler.
Chan Chandler.
The big,
What's
Big
this?
shoulders. He
We're on
always
to
thought
big
they were
bands at the
fat.
real Palm Isle now.
Oh.
And old Maddie's Ballroom.
To grab 'em and stab 'em?
No, it was really a nice
She never had a
place.
problem.
She never did have a problem.
mm-mm.
She had bouncers that would get rid of any drunk that was starting to make a problem.
Mhm.
She wound up at the Rio. Then her son ran it, and then he died. So now they have Love Wednesday.
Yeah, just do that.
That's a traveling salesman's paradise. Come through on Wednesday, and they meet married women and take them to the motel and then stay all day.
Is that the one where they get the car keys, you just kind of throw them in a big pot and everybody just takes their pick or whatever?
No, that was in Longview.
Oh.
What was that?
This crowd.
Just a kind of a meet and greet thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
It was about
You
7
never knew
couples
who your
that
partner
thought
really
that
was
they were
gonna
better
be.
than anybody else. The women were all
Potluck.
rich and the men married them for their money and didn't work. The wives played golf all morning and bridge in the afternoon. Had sitters that came by the month, paid them by the month. They came every night. And they'd all get drunk and go sleep with whoever.
Was there some arrangement to it, or did they just end up with whoever?
I guess it was wound up with whoever.
Yeah. A lot of the idea is throw your car keys in this big pile and just pick one out that wasn't yours.
That was your matchup.
Yeah.
But you know, I picked up a book up at the Historical Museum the other day, and articles by people who lived in Kilgore before the boom, then all during the boom. The last person that wrote one is that Griffin person, you know, that still comes to the Historical Museum. And every one of those people mentioned Maddie's Ballroom. It was known nationwide. It had a good reputation. And she ran the club with an iron hand. If a man or a woman went in there one time, she had taxi dancers in the early days. And if anybody insulted one of her girls, they were thrown out and they could never go back. So she carried that place. It was awful looking. It was just, it was oil field. But she ran it with an iron hand.
It was in the woods back in, it was in the woods deep on the old Kilgore Highway.
And you know, one day in Mike's office, he has had trouble with the switchboard. And this young man from the telephone company came to check on what was wrong. And he said, "Mr. Jackson, did you ever know my grandmother?" And Mike said, "I don't know who." He said it was Maddie that had the ballroom. And Mike said, "Lordy, yes, I knew her. Everybody knew her. She built a pretty home over on Caddo Lake. And she developed cancer before she died. And she died at that home."